so excited to introduce our speaker tonight. I did hear some comments from folks saying, hey, how come it's so heavy on the marine mammals? Well, that might have something to do with me, but for those of you who don't know, I actually really love birds as well. I'm pretty darn birdie, if the truth be told, birdie and marine mammal-y, and that's all because of my experience at College of the Redwoods. And Allison and I were just talking about that any of us and many of us that had the pleasure and the opportunity to study at the College of the Redwoods, there were a couple of professors there that were absolutely phenomenal and inspirational. And there are many people that are with the Audubon Society and the Noyo Center for Marine Science and just live in our community and enjoy all sorts of things that belong to our ecosystems, and learned from Teresa Schallers and Greg Grantham when they were here when College of the Redwoods had the Coast Campus. So with that said, I'm going to introduce you to Allison Sabula, and just grateful for her being here tonight, sharing her knowledge with us, which is extraordinary. We're really lucky and to have her here on the coast doing the work she does. And yeah, with that, I introduce to you Allison Sabula.
Thank you, Sarah. I hope everyone can hear me now. Thank you for your kind introduction. I also want to thank the Noyo Center for this opportunity to share the story of the Western Snowy Plover with everyone this evening. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank longtime State Park volunteer Becky Bowen. Many of the images that you're going to see this evening in this presentation were generously donated to me by Becky Bowen. She took all of these pictures locally, many of them during her 15-year service as a volunteer coordinator for the Save Our Shorebirds program at McCarricker, which is also a joint project with Mendocino Coast Audubon State Park. So just want to thank her, and you'll recognize her images right away because they're the really good ones. Well, good evening, everyone. I appreciate you joining me this evening for this program. I'm going to introduce you to the Western Snowy Plover and talk a little bit about our state parks management program here on the Mendocino coast, and then what we could do, all of us could do, to help the Western Snowy Plover survive. So now I'd like to introduce this charming little bird. It's a sparrow-sized shorebird. It's sandy brown above and bright white below, which is probably where it gets the name Snowy Plover. And you'll notice it has a fairly short bill, and that's going to be important when we try to differentiate it from some other shorebirds that we have here. Also notice the really large eyes in proportion to its head, and I'll tell you why that's important later as well. And then note the dark markings on the head, and especially that partial ring around the collar. That will also help us with some ID differentiation with other shorebirds. Some of the, oh, I'm sorry, let's see. I'm sorry, we're going to go forward here. I was on the wrong slide. So this is our Western Snowy Plover. The same things I was just saying earlier. Sorry, I was on the wrong slide. You'll notice that this bird is also banded, and banding allows researchers to track the movements of snowy plovers, helps us determine survival rates of the birds, and it can also illuminate some of their breeding history. And we don't band here locally, but many of the birds that show up at our local beaches are banded. And I can share that information with the research network and learn about the history of these birds. Snowy plovers are found at both McCarricker State Park and Manchester State Park locally. And here's a fun fact. The highest number of Western Snowy Plovers are actually found here in winter. Birds converge on our local beaches from destinations as far south as San Diego and as far north as Oregon. And they don't have a strict north-south migration. They disperse and they end up on our local beaches to winter here. So what kind of habitat do plovers prefer? They like sandy beaches, wide open areas with good visibility. They want to be able to see predators approaching or any type of danger. They also like a little bit of debris on the beach, woody debris, old rack debris from the high tides, and even some low vegetation. You can also find snowy plovers in our coastal dunes. Again, they like fairly low topography so that they can get sort of a 360 view from their resting areas or their nesting areas, and sparse vegetation. And our beaches and dunes are really important habitat for migrating shorebirds. Right now, we're in the midst of a migration. These birds are arriving from their breeding areas in the tundra, the Arctic, Canada, and Alaska. And they're stopping here along the shore to feed and rest. There are many different species that come through and use our beach and dunes as a stopover. I love this photo because it shows 4 different species of shorebirds that you could find here on our local beaches. Another beautiful photograph by Becky Bowen. You'll note the different lengths of the bills on these birds. That kind of gives you a clue to their feeding style. The shorebirds that arrive here from these destinations need to rest and feed and regain their energy to continue their migration. And that's why these dune and beach habitats are so important. Sanderlings are a species of bird that arrive by the hundreds. These birds are migrating from Alaska to South America. These are the ones you're going to find running back and forth near the edge of the surf, foraging like little sewing machines in the sand. They're actually reaching into the sand and the substrate to get their food. So sanderlings are often confused with snowy plovers. I often meet visitors on the beach and they excitedly tell me that they just saw hundreds of snowy plovers just up the beach. I won't miss them. And I truly wish we had hundreds and hundreds of snowy plovers here. Well, that would put me out of a job, but I would love to see that many birds someday. These are most likely sanderlings, and you can compare these photos here. You can see that there are some resemblances, but if you look closely at some of their field marks, you want to note the length of the bill on the sanderling versus the snowy plover. The sanderling's bill is longer. Look at the plumage and color patterns on the backs of the sanderlings with those pretty little colors and kind of like chevrons. And the snowy plover has the solid color back, kind of a tan brown color. You also notice the markings on the head. The snowy plover has a dark forehead and that collar. Those are brighter during the breeding season, but again, the markings are quite different from the sanderlings. And guess what? Just to complicate matters, we have other types of plovers on our beaches, and some of those include the semi-palmated plovers. These are about the same size, maybe a little bit larger, but that's hard to tell when you're just seeing a little bird all by itself on the beach. But notice how dark the back is on the semi-palmated plover. It's almost a chocolate brown. And then the bird has a complete collar ring, so it goes all the way around the throat. And the birds at the top here are actually juveniles, recently fledged birds. And they don't have much color on the bill or leg, but you'll see that the adults have some orange on the bill and orange legs. So that will help you differentiate these from a Western Snowy Plover. And again, these birds are moving back and forth between their Arctic breeding areas and Central and South America. Many of you might be familiar with another plover. Did you know that the kilders in the plover family? These are a larger plover, about robin size. They also have a pretty dark back. You notice they have 2 rings around the collar, the throat. They also have kind of a reddish eye. And these birds are extremely vocal, very noisy. So they're going to let you know that they're around and maybe you're in their way. So snowy plovers mix it up sometimes and they'll join other groups of shorebirds. Here's a little snowy plover nestled in with some sanderlings and least sandpipers on the beach, taking some shelter in kelp. But most often you're going to find snowy plovers in small groups at or above the recent high tide line or in dry sand habitat. Snowy plovers are absolutely masters of concealment. They have evolved to blend into their sandy and dune habitats with that solid colored back and those markings in the head. How many plovers can you find in this photo? I'm going to give you a second to take a look. Maybe you need to zoom in. Some of them are pretty obvious. You can see how they blend in to the vegetation and the habitat. Surveying for plovers is like a game of hide and seek sometimes. The plovers are also fond of depressions in the sand, and those little pockets provide hiding places and shelter from the wind. And you can imagine if the snowy plover ducks down into this little track, it's going to blend in perfectly. So I mentioned the shorter bill versus the sanderling's longer bill, and wanted to talk a little bit about how snowy plovers feed and where they feed. They're most often associated with the rack line. That's the area debris that was deposited by the most recent tides. And they have a really interesting feeding strategy. I also remember I mentioned the larger eye in proportion to its head. They actually look for their prey items. They watch, they run, and then they grab it. You can see snowy plovers and other types of plovers demonstrating this feeding technique from quite a distance, and it can help you identify a plover versus a sandpiper or a sanderling. They like to feed on invertebrates that they find often associated with the kelp, but also little sandflies and other small like crustaceans and sandhoppers, we sometimes call them. So as spring approaches, we start to see birds pairing up and watching for pair behavior. And in this photograph, we have a female on the left and a male on the right in nesting habitat. Nesting consists of making a set of scrapes. The males tend to create multiple scrapes. It's just a very simple depression in the sand. The females will sometimes help, and then they'll choose one for their nest. They make the scrapes by basically dropping down on their little bellies, scraping with their legs, and spinning in a little circle. And it's absolutely adorable when you see them do this on the beach. So nests are not very elaborate. They're pretty simple. 3 eggs are typical. That's a complete clutch for the Western Snowy Plovers. And you'll see in this example, which all of these photos were taken on our local beaches, that the kelp here provides some cover and protection. And I remember when I finally found this nest, when the female was hunkered down on the eggs, you could just barely see the top of her head over the kelp. It was great concealment. Sometimes we have nests that are associated with shell hash or other small debris that's near the rack area. And native dune vegetation can provide really great concealment and protection, as well as some shade. The nest that you see here was placed in some old plant debris, actually dried up sea rocket, I believe. And it kind of acted like a natural fence for protection and concealment around this nest. Can you see the egg in this one? This nest was placed in what I call shell hash, and it was discarded carapaces from sand crabs that had then kind of bleached out. And that one was really tricky. The plovers are good at that. So when it comes to incubation, in general, the females incubate during the day and the males have the night shift. So they both have incubation duties, very dedicated birds. And they are in it for the long haul. They are on the nest 24/7 for the most part for about 28 days. And they're protecting that nest from the elements. If it gets too cold, they need to be on the eggs. If it's warm, they need to shade the eggs. They're also looking for danger. And when they sense danger near their nests, they may rapidly run away, and they fake an injury by flapping their wings or dragging their tail in the sand to kind of lure away the predator or the danger away from the nest or away from the chicks. You can just imagine how vulnerable the nest and the chicks are. When hatch day arrives, you can see that the chicks in this photo are very well concealed. The chicks actually begin vocalizing within days of hatch. The eggs begin to star, little cracks develop, and the chicks actually have a temporary egg tooth on the end of their bill so they can use it to get out of the egg. How many chicks can you see in this photo, and how many eggs? This one was in some kelp debris and some Valella, that by the wind sailor that's purple when it washes up fresh, but when it bleaches out, it's white and creates some great cryptic coloring, as we call it. So there are two little chicks up towards the top of that nest and one egg. And when the chicks hatch from their eggs, they are essentially mini plovers. They are covered in down, speckled to blend in with the sandy environment. Their eyes are open and their legs are fully developed. In fact, if you want to band a snowy plover, the best time is to do it when they're a chick. You can actually put bands on their legs then. This is a very different strategy. It's similar to like ducks and chickens, but most songbirds, if you've ever seen a songbird nest hatch, those little chicks are completely naked, no feathers. Their eyes are closed and they're completely dependent on their parents for food. But snowy plover chicks are ready to go. They're up and running within hours of hatching, and the adults will help them find food and help protect them. But basically, they need to get out there and start eating right away and developing. This chick is about 2 days old. And after the nest hatches, guess what? The male takes over. I like to call him a modern dad. He cares for the chicks, he protects them, helps them find food, keeps them warm. In this photo, you can see the male, and you notice how many legs it has. He's actually brooding all of his chicks. They duck under him for protection or to warm up until they're, when they initially hatch, their downy feathers don't completely insulate them. So they do need to be what's called brooded, kept warm. Now, after the nest hatches, the female may go off and find a new mate and start a new nest. Females may have up to 3 nests during a nesting season, which extends from March 1st to September 30th. Males may have up to 2. So males use vegetated dunes to shelter their chicks from weather and protect the chicks from danger. So it's really important that they have habitat to seek refuge in. And as the chicks develop, they go through some kind of awkward stages. This is about a 2 to 3 week old chick. And this is a 3 to 4 week old chick. When they reach the age of 28 days, they're considered fledged. That means they're capable of flight. But in general, they're not quite ready to take off, and they spend quite a bit more time on the beach where they were born. This is a fledgling photo taken in 2019 at 10 Mile Beach. Since 2017 to 2022, 10 Mile Beach has produced 11 snowy plover fledglings. And just this week, I was able to determine that 3 snowy plover chicks fledged from 10 Mile Beach this season. So we've added to the total, and we've got 3 new members to our local snowy plover flock. Yay, plovers. This photo is just an example of a juvenile versus an adult. The juvenile on the left there, you can notice the patterns on its back. We call it scaling. Those are just fresh feathers, newly emerged. They still have some white tips on the edge of it, so you get this kind of pattern look, as well as on the head. Whereas the adult there has a solid brown back, and you can see the darker markings on the head. But overall, they're, pretty similar in size. The juvenile's a little bit smaller. So after fledging, the young birds join the main flock, where they disperse to new locations. Some will remain at their natal beach or the place where they were born, and we refer to that as site fidelity. And some juveniles will disperse great distances. For instance, we had a banded bird show up here at 10 Mile Beach, and it was from Santa Barbara. So I'd like to talk a little bit about our Western Snowy Plover management plan here on the Mendocino coast. We are part of a range-wide recovery effort for the Western Snowy Plover that basically covers its entire range from Washington State to Baja. And in 1993, the Western Snowy Plover received protection status under the Endangered Species Act. It's a federally threatened species, and in California, it's a species of special concern. Our federal permit that we are required to have for our management activities, it guides our management and our park operations. And we're required to conduct clearance surveys and create concession agreements and conduct certain activities only during the non-breeding season. Those are the things that we need to do in order to stay in compliance with our permit. And all of our surveyors receive training under this federal permit in order to conduct surveys in snowy plover habitat, look for nests, or construct any type of protective fencing. So what's going on with the snowy plover? Why is it having such a difficult time? Well, like a lot of many other species, their decline is due to habitat loss, predation, and human-caused disturbance. And you'll note there are current population estimates about 3,000, possibly a little bit higher. We're hoping to get an update soon on our most recent breeding season. Here in Mendocino, our goal for the recovery of the snowy plover is 10 breeding pairs, and they need to produce at least, or fledge at least 1 chick per male for 5 years, consecutive years. So some of our efforts to help the snowy plover with the lost habitat include some major habitat restoration projects. In 2014, there was a dune restoration project that removed remnants of the old haul road that stretched through parts of the dune system. This road was a barrier to both sand movement and the young birds crossing from the beach into more protected habitat. Now that we've removed the road, you can see the before and after photos. We're seeing corridors opening up, and we're seeing a lowering of the dune face, and that allows for an expansion of the snowy plover habitat, as well as in habitat for many of our beautiful native plants. After removal of the road, we saw the return of many native plant species. The seed source was available, or we were able to introduce some native seed. This pink sand verbena is a rare plant species, and we're seeing more and more of it after this restoration. So another habitat issue at our local beaches is an introduced grass species called Ammophila arenaria, European beach grass. Just like the name says, it was introduced from Europe. It's highly invasive, and it was introduced to stabilize dune systems, which seemed like a great idea at the time, especially if you had a road or a railway running by this area, as it was in the past. But it's a state park now and a natural preserve, and it's creating a lot of problems for a natural dune system. The long root systems create very steep dunes, which in winter you can see get cliffed out and make it almost impossible to walk along the beach at high tides. And then European beachgrass completely eliminates plant and wildlife habitat by creating a monoculture where pretty much everything else is eliminated. So we've put in many, many years of effort to remove beach grass. It requires multiple treatments and it's a lot of hard work. We have some really dedicated crew members that have been with parks, some of them for almost 20 years. And it's due to their extraordinary efforts that we're seeing these transformations. That lower picture on the right, you can see taller beach grass covered dunes to the left, and then an area that's been restored. And you can note how much more habitat is available, how much, and the topography is a bit lower in that section as well. So you can imagine the value of native dune systems in our area when you think of how developed the California coastline is in general. These native dune ecosystems provide valuable habitat to insects and pollinators, as well as food sources for our native wildlife, places to raise their young. And this is an area near Inglenook Creek that was one of the first areas to be restored. And I think it really demonstrates the aesthetic value too of a native dune system. One of the native plants at McCarricker State Park that this restoration benefited was a federally endangered Coryzanthe howellii, known as Howell's spine flower. And this plant grows nowhere else other than McCarricker State Park. It's known as an endemic. Actually, we think that plants can't move and colonize new areas, but the spines on the spine flower actually stick to animals moving through or and get blown around. And this little annual is springing up all over the place after the restoration. It's great to see. Another native plant in our dune system is the federally endangered Erysimum menziesii, or Menzies wallflower. And our restoration efforts have resulted in areas of beautiful blooms every spring of the wallflower, making a great comeback. And that's nice to see, there's a butterfly right there taking advantage of the nectaring. And of course, once the dunes were restored, we were so pleased to see the plovers move right in. There's a group of plovers here in a restored area at Timbal Beach. And in 2022, we were able to document the first nest in the dune system as opposed to on the beach, where up until recently, all of our known nests have been found. In 2023, this year, we had 3 nests in the dune. And you can see how with that much more habitat opened up, just gives the birds a much better chance of success. These are all positive changes. However, we are still facing many challenges to the plover survival. And one of those is the exploding raven population. Here and elsewhere. Ravens are very intelligent birds and they've adapted to human settlement and they can take advantage of easy food sources. And let's face it, human beings can be a little sloppy sometimes. Many people even feed ravens and this encourages unnatural behavior, increases their population, kind of gives them an advantage. And they are not only predators of our shorebirds, but also our seabirds like oyster catchers. And if you really like songbirds in your yard, ravens are a major predator of eggs and chicks. In that lower right picture, you can see raven tracks marching right up to a former nest at 10 Mile Beach. And so we can say pretty conclusively that it was predated by a raven. So some other human-caused disturbances that are leading to problems for the snowy plover, our main threat are off-leash dogs. Dogs are perceived as dangerous predators by all types of wildlife. Basically, the sight, smell, and sound of a dog instantly triggers an alarm or an alert mode. That might mean that the wildlife or the birds are paying attention to the dog, and maybe the dog isn't even interested in them, but they get into the fight or flight kind of mode. It uses up a lot of energy. And then, of course, many people might say, well, my dog would never catch or harm wildlife, but even just chasing them down the beach, especially our migratory birds, can really put their lives in danger. I have actually seen dogs attack our native wildlife, so it does happen. Our plovers will flee from a nest. It's been shown through research that when a dog comes into view. So their eggs and chicks are extremely vulnerable to these types of disturbances. And then some of the other issues that are illustrated here are equestrians. They are required to ride down the wet sand, but that doesn't always happen. And then we do have the occasional illegal vehicle trespass. And then the driftwood structures, I know those are fun to build and all, but they tend to attract a lot of garbage and problems afterwards. But also just dragging the wood through the habitat to build it can actually damage, harm, or disturb nesting birds. Some new impacts are some new recreational uses here on the coast. We're seeing a lot more drone use on our coast. And the problem that presents for wildlife is that drones mimic avian predators. So it basically looks like a big hawk or a falcon flying by or hovering. And I've actually seen, especially shorebird, seabirds offshore, oystercatchers and cormorants flying from a nesting rock because a drone approached. When a bird leaves its nest, then its eggs and chicks are vulnerable to other predators. So the other new activity that we've noticed is e-bikes, which is a great form of transportation. But their speed and their ability to ride through softer sand and into nesting habitat really presents a problem during the nesting season for plovers. At our park, we ask that those be used on designated roads only and trails. So in order to address some of these issues, State Parks has an education and outreach program. We install regulatory signs and try to inform the public. We've also received some grants that have allowed us to develop nice interpretive panels like this new one about the dune systems created by local artist Eric Fielder, some beautiful artwork. And then we've even had a program in our local schools, which the Audubon helped with and directed, where children learned about snowy plovers and then created original artwork. We developed a dog map for McCarricker State Park. And in 2021, we started a new docent program. And this is outreach efforts at both McCarricker and Manchester State Park. Our volunteers go to popular beach access points and they share information with park visitors, talk to them about the wildlife species that we see at our local parks, and they give out stickers and tattoos to kids. And I'd like to give a little shout out to our Mendocino Coast Audubon Society for helping us purchase some of those outreach materials. It's been great. The outreach program emphasizes the importance of our natural preserves. So we really consider these the jewels of our state park system. They protect outstanding natural areas and they preserve rare and endangered plant and animal species in their ecosystems. And we really are so very fortunate to have places like the Inglenook Fen 10 Mile Dunes Natural Preserve. It's one of the last intact coastal dune systems in California. Imagine that in our own backyards. And many species besides the snowy plover call our parks home. So how can you help the snowy plovers? It's our individual actions really can make a difference. So here are some suggestions. If you can, and when you're visiting the beach, if you can recreate on the wet sand below the high tide line or the rack line, especially during the nesting season, that would be really helpful to the snowy plovers. You're less likely to encounter nesting birds or chicks. And if you could keep an eye out for the fenced areas, these allow us to protect nesting areas. We ask you to use other parts of the beach during your visit. In this photo, you can notice the difference that a fenced area makes versus a non-fenced area. The area to the right, you can't really see the rope, but there's just a very simple rope and pole system to provide habitat for the birds. And we did have multiple nests in this area this year. When you're out enjoying our parks, remember to give wild animals space. I actually find that if you sit back from a distance and observe quietly, you might actually notice some interesting behavior or discover something you didn't know about these animals. It's a great way to learn more about our local wildlife. And also, we ask that you dispose of all your trash and food items. Don't feed animals. Wild animals can be harmed by human food and trash, and they really don't benefit from our handouts. If you visit our if you visit our parks and enjoy biking or riding horses, please use our designated roads and trails. These park regulations help protect our natural areas for future generations. And if you have a furry companion like I do, please visit our local dog-friendly locations. There are many dog-friendly locations on the coast, including the Hall Road Trail and the new Coast Trail in Fort Bragg, where leash dogs are welcome. Noyo Beach has an off-leash area under the bridge. We have 2 local dog parks within Fort Bragg and Mendocino. And then if you do want to run your dog on a beach, Seaside Beach, managed by Mendocino Land Trust, on the north side of the 10-mile river, is open to dogs. Please don't cross the river. That is the boundary into the natural preserve. So communities all up and down the West Coast are trying to do their part. I love this photo. It was shared with me by someone from Friends of the Dune in Humboldt County. They had an outreach activity with local students where they spelled out this message and created this beach art. Together, we can give plovers and all our wild neighbors a future on our beautiful coast. I thank you for your attention and for your time this evening. If we have some questions, we'll do that now.
That was wonderful, Allison. I couldn't wait to hear this talk, because Allison and I, we've been friends and colleagues and have worked together for close to 10 years, in sharing the beaches and sharing the work that we do in a mutually respectful way. And I couldn't wait to hear this talk tonight, because I actually hadn't followed up on where you're at with the successes of the areas. And it's actually just almost brings me to tears to see the successes over the last few years. It's just phenomenal to see the difference from 10 years ago to what we're seeing now. And I waited to peek and see how many birds or how many successful nests and how many birds you had, and I'm shocked. And I celebrate with you. And Allison and I run into each other sometimes after a hard day where off-leash dogs have done something, or drones or remote, and we kvetch together. But this is a real celebration of all of your hard work and tears and dedication. Allison, I don't know how many miles you walk every week, but I also just want to say that when we first started to respond to deceased marine mammals in this area, it was a little bit difficult in the beginning for us to kind of navigate around the work that, rescuing marine mammals or responding to deceased marine mammals. And also that's important, but the birds are way more fragile, way more endangered than most of our marine mammals. And so we've learned to work together, is what my point is. There's certain beaches we don't survey. We don't send surveyors out on these snowy plover beaches. And now you can see why that is so. And Allison actually is one of my biggest reporters. So people that are out there on the beaches doing these snowy plover surveys will call us and report deceased or stranded marine mammals. And then they'll either say it's a no-go, and then that's totally okay. We don't have to respond to every marine mammal, and we want to give the space to the snowy plovers. So that's just sort of a little bit of background on our relationship, but I'm just astounded at and celebrate this positive news, Allison. And I see that Karen has her hand raised. Do you want to go ahead and speak out, Karen? It's fine with me. I also have chats that I'll get back to.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thanks to the Noyo Center, and thank you, Allison, for your work and lovely slides and information. I was curious, I don't get up to 10 Mile or to Fort Bragg as often as I do to Manchester. And I'm wondering if you could say anything about the storms and if that had a noticeable impact on what was happening with the plovers this winter. I'm definitely not an expert, but they weren't where I expected them to be after all the storms. So just curious.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. That's a great observation. And that's what was my experience this year as well. So we saw some really late storms, winter and spring, and some extremely high surf. And what I noticed when I got to 10 Mile Beach this year towards the beginning of the nesting season was the northern section was completely what we kind of call cliffed out, escarped. So the surf and the tides had gone right up to the dunes and sheared it off. And you had steep walls and you still had tides reaching the base of that dune. And that definitely changed the habitat at 10 Mile at the northern end. Just as an example, 2 years previously, we had 12 nests in the 10 Mile River area, the general area. And this year that sand flat was subject to tidal overwash well into the nesting season. So no habitat was available there. And then we found the birds spent the winter at the southern section of 10 Mile Beach, more towards Ford Avenue, which was also the first time we've seen the entire winter flock making use of that area. And interestingly, as this nesting season approached, some of the birds stayed there and nested on the beach as well as in the dunes at the southern portion of 10 Mile Beach. And we'd never recorded nesting activity that far south. So it was very interesting. But, snowy plovers evolved in these beach and dune systems, and our beach and dune systems are very dynamic. We all know if we visit a beach, sometimes from day to day they change, but certainly we can have really big seasonal changes. But there was still habitat, and the restoration has allowed the birds to move into the dune, so that gives them more room to nest. And I was really pleased to see how much nesting activity we had in spite of those storms and that difficult start to the nesting season.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
That one other question, maybe?
Yeah,
sure.
Don't we rope off Manchester the way they do up at 10 Mile or up in Fort Bragg?
So we call it symbolic fencing or a plover protection area. And we do in general install that at a known nesting area. Manchester, I was finding that again, the best habitat location was being overwashed throughout the season. And we've lost a lot of fencing and materials in the past because we weren't able to predict these high tides and storm surge cycles that we sometimes go through. And it breaks my heart every time I send debris into the ocean. So we're kind of cautious around that. We will put up fencing in the future if it's possible. We did have nesting at Manchester 2 years ago. It was the first nest in 15 years. So that was exciting to see. Unfortunately, it didn't survive either predation or a windstorm. We're not certain, but just to see the birds there and trying again was very encouraging. And then we have we are continuing to do restoration at 10 Mile, but we are going to be starting some beach grass and other like ice plant restoration. You may have noticed some of the headlands are now showing beautiful wildflower blooms because we were able to remove ice plant and beach grass from some of those locations. So eventually Manchester might also have more habitat.
Yeah, that is something that really is, again, just boggles my mind when you walk just north towards the 10 Mile between Ward Avenue and 10 Mile to see the wildflowers that are there that weren't there just so recently.
Yeah. It really is. I love how, given a chance, nature rebounds. And I think of all the other animals, wildlife that benefit from that. And, we can also learn to appreciate these rare and unique ecosystems because, there just really aren't many places like this left in California.
Yeah, it must really just feel kind of amazing to be a part of this, Allison, for you and your crew and
Yeah, thank you for mentioning the crew because, obviously I just do one small part of this, which is monitoring the plovers. But we've had really dedicated crew members and we have a great crew with some new members that, day in, day out, they're out there, on the ground in the habitat, helping to restore the dunes and the beach systems. And then our program managers and leads, Tara Fuller and Brendan O'Neill, Renee Pasquinelli in the past, finding funding, getting support for restoration, and then managing those projects, which, take a lot of planning and coordination. And you have to take into account, like Sarah, you were talking about the effects that maybe marine mammal rescue might have on endangered species. We have to take that into account too when we do projects. So we're having to consider other species. We have to have timelines, within the calendar year to maybe avoid breeding season or sensitive species at certain times. And then there's listed plant species that we have to consider. So it's very complex. And I know sometimes people wish things would happen on a faster time frame, but we're kind of in it for the long haul with the long view towards restoration. And all of this will also benefit our coastline when we talk about sea level rise and climate change. We are already seeing sea level rise on our coastline. And so the more habitat we have available, the more that we can restore, there's more room for everyone then, on our coast.
yeah, really rewarding. I wonder, I know that there's frustration when we're all being really careful, and in our beach survey training, we watched the Snowy Plover video that was put together a few years ago, and California Academy of Sciences with my grant made that available for our surveyors. But then they go out and see bad behavior from visitors or other people and ask me, what can we do? What can we do? How can we help? So just going to put that out there to you.
Yeah. Well, if that concerns them and they want to help, they could consider joining our outreach program to help us share the information and the messages. I mean, we do put up signs, we have interpretive panels, we have brochures, but a lot of people come to the beach and they don't want to read a brochure, they don't want to look at a sign, they want to go enjoy their picnic or do some kind of activity or just be with their family and friends. So I think that actual contact with an outreach, a docent, having a conversation. I think it's really helpful to make those connections with people personally. And I always try to sense, like, what do people care about? And what are they interested in? And how can I help them appreciate this place and what we have here? And maybe, sometimes all it is getting that information, and then you realize I could change my behavior just a little to benefit this place and these wild creatures that I actually care about. So that's one opportunity. I think also just, if you care about it, but you're not the kind of person that wants to talk to strangers, which is not an easy task, just share the information with your family and friends, the people that you're close to. And you can maybe become involved with our local organizations like Noyo Center and Mendocino Coast Audubon and Native Plant Society, and maybe join a volunteer group that's helping with restoration or other volunteer efforts. There's whatever role you feel comfortable with, but also find what you really care about and try to find a way to contribute.
Nice.
I mean, we can all really make a difference if we pull together our resources and our energy.
True. Well, we will encourage our Noya Center, all of our Noya Center to watch this talk, just to learn a lot more, very informative,
Yeah.
beautiful pictures, Becky. And I was talking to Tim Bray the other day. I think he was talking on the Ecology Hour. For young folks, we've had a number of interns. I know they've gone through your programs, and some of them are coming to Noya Center. And this is the kind of work too that you can think about in your future with restoration and these kind of conservation projects. It's alive and well and dynamic right now. And go study wildlife biology, study ecosystems, ecology, all of that stuff. It's just we have a treasure, as Allison said.
Yeah, no, I feel fortunate to do this work, and I love my office.
Definitely. Michael, did you have your hand up?
Well, yeah, I just was going to ask Allison, for people that did want to look at volunteering on the outreach team, where should they be directed to? What's the best way to go about that?
I wish I had included more information about that, but that's it. Thank you for bringing that up. They can contact me directly here at State Parks. Maybe if someone is able to just my email up in the chat.
I can do it. Yeah. Also, what is your email? Do you mind?
It's just my name, spelled allison.cebula@parks.ca.gov.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat here.
Yeah, that's great. And they can send an email, can include a phone number if they'd rather talk over the phone. And I'm happy to talk to them about our programs. And also, since Sarah mentioned the video that some folks view for the Snowy Plover stewardship type training, if that's available, it could be added to the chat as a link. And if people want more information, it's a really great video that was produced down in Point Reyes. Has a lot of more detail about Western Snowy Plovers.
Oh, the two combined actually make a really good, solid presentation, because this one's really local. But in order to become a volunteer and do any survey work for Noya Center, you are required to watch that video, because
Yeah.
time again, you do get
Yeah.
people who are like, I didn't see plovers, I didn't see them anywhere, or I saw them all over the place. So
Yeah.
there's a little bit more
Right.
to it than that.
So I actually had some visitors. It was during the winter, so I knew the birds weren't nesting, but I watched the visitors from a distance walk directly through the entire flock. And the birds just stood up very quietly, wandered away, and sat down again. And the people came through, and then the birds went back to their little depressions in the sand. And as they approached me, they asked what I was watching. And I said, well, I was watching Snowy Plovers. And they said, oh, we've never seen one. What do they look like? And I said, oh, well, you happen to just walk right through the entire flock. Would you? So I turned the spotting scope to the flock and I put them on them, and they just couldn't believe it. They said, we didn't see a thing, And often people are talking, or they're looking up, not looking down, and they don't notice these little camouflage birds scurrying around at their feet. So they're well adapted to their environment, and they have strategies for survival, but they're just up against a lot right now, kind of coming from all sides. So whatever we can do to give them a little break.
I love it.
Wow.
With the kids, I forget which education program it was, but I had one of the kids stop and ask me, and they said, well, if we don't because there's the book, The Pink Lady, which is a wonderful book about the life and times of an individual snowy plover who Pink Lady because she had a pink band. Amazing little book. It's in English and Spanish. I don't know where we can find it, but a treasure.
Oh, yeah, so I have several copies.
Good. So this child asked, because the snowy plovers will hide in the little footprints, So the child said, well, if we're not walking out there, where will they go?
That's cute. Yeah, no,
To sit in.
yeah. Yeah.
Well, any other questions for Allison this evening? Any other comments? I just see lots of praise to you.
Oh, thank you so much. I do appreciate your support and the kind words and everyone's interest in the snowy plovers. I think they're really remarkable birds, and I've learned so much from them. And I continue to learn every season that I work out there.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for giving your time to the Noya Center, and thanks everybody for
course.
joining us this evening. And we will see you around, and spread the word. Share this great story.
Thanks, everyone.